Trying to impress the girl at school, a boy uses a time machine to travel through history, but ends up distorting space-time and will have to do anything to avoid a universal collapse. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, The Adventures of Peabody and Sherman, from 2014. At the New York Adoption Center, a puppy with Einstein's IQ spent a long time trying to get adopted, but after several rejections, he decided to focus on the pursuit of knowledge and graduated from Harvard. After several inventions, Mr. Peabody decided to adopt a human boy named Sherman, who helped him with his greatest construction of all, the time machine. The two decide to go to the Palace of Versailles with the French Revolution about to begin. In Marie Antoinette's foyer, the dog and the boy serve a slice of cake to the Queen, who distributes the food among her guests. But outside, the hungry people see the scene and decide to rebel, starting a revolution. With the monarchy about to fall, Peabody says it's time to go and call Sherman, who has mysteriously disappeared. Desperate, the dog starts looking for the boy and finds him in the kitchen, but there's no time to run away. The enraged population arrives at the palace and arrests everyone they see, including Peabody. While the executioner prepares the guillotine, the dog manages to get loose from the board and puts a melon to be cut in its place, catching Sherman and escaping through the manhole. Together, the two run through the sewer until they are surrounded by Robespierre's men, who capture Sherman. To defend himself, Peabody throws a melon into the revolutionary's hands and manages to knock his sword out, forcing the man to grab the saber of one of his soldiers for a fencing match. Despite managing to defeat Robespierre, the genius dog is still outnumbered and takes a desperate measure to escape, throwing his sword at some wooden planks that were holding back the sewage water. Surfing through the water in a makeshift surfboard, Peabody lights some sparks that ignites the methane gas, causing them to be hurled skywards. After landing safely, the two walk to the time machine and back to the present, where Peabody takes Sherman to his first day of school. When they arrive in front of the school, Peabody hands the boy a dog whistle and tells him that if he needs any help, just call him. After picking up the gift, Sherman goes straight to history class where the teacher asks him a few questions about George Washington. Since she likes history, a girl called Penny answers all the teacher's questions, but Sherman has already been with George Washington and corrects everything she says, which makes the girl furious. After class, the boy goes to the cafeteria where he's trying to make new friends, but that's only until Penny shows up. Angrily, the girl tells him he's nothing but a dog and throws Sherman's snack away, telling him to go and get it while continuing to call him a dog. Even though he's sad, Sherman gets up to retrieve the sandwich and Penny takes the opportunity to take the whistle from his pocket, as well as squeezing the boy's neck while continuing to call him a puppy, saying that she'll only stop after he admits that he's nothing but a dog. Because of this fight, Mr. Peabody is called to the school where he discovers that Sherman has bitten Penny's arm. Because of this, a guardianship council official known as Mrs. Grunion is called in to try to resolve the situation, but for some reason, the woman totally ignores what Penny was doing and focuses only on Sherman's bite, accusing Peabody of looking after the boy as if he were a dog. Grunion then says that he will pay a visit next night and that, if she finds anything wrong, she will do everything she can to make sure that he loses custody of the boy. The next day, Peabody prepares a full meal and calls Penny's family for dinner. While the children try to make up in the bedroom, Peabody talks to Patty and Paul Peterson, trying to please them, but even with all their efforts, father and son seem far from winning the visitors' sympathy. Tired of insisting, Sherman decides to tell the truth about why he knows so much about George Washington and shows the machine to the girl, who insists on traveling through time. Without knowing anything about what they're doing, Peabody manages to win the Petersons over with a chiropractic session and prepares a drink to celebrate, but when they go to drink, Sherman shows up and asks them to talk alone. Seeing his son, Body talks about his progress with the Petersons and asks where Penny is, discovering that the girl has ended up in ancient Egypt. To save time, the dog decides to hypnotize the couple and together they go to Egypt to rescue Penny. As soon as they arrive at the place, the two find the girl living as an Egyptian princess and try to take her back, but Tutankhamun shows up and stops them, saying he's going to rip their skin off as a wedding present. Upon hearing this, Peabody says that this is not a good idea and warns Penny that Tutankhamun died young, but Penny doesn't see the problem with this and insists on getting married. At this point, the Egyptian Prime Minister appears and explains a little more about the marriage ceremony, saying that when the pharaoh dies, his wife must give up her life to be mummified along with her husband. Since Tutankhamun died when he was only 17, Penny finally understands why Peabody said it was a bad idea and tries to back out of the wedding, but the Prime Minister says there's no more time and takes her to the palace, throwing Peabody and Sherman into a tomb. Reading the hieroglyphics, the dog arrives at the first trap and manages to pass through without difficulty, but when it's his turn, Sherman can't read and crosses a random path, activating the tomb's traps, which begin to collapse. Running around the place, they arrive at Ra's boats and Peabody points to the vehicle that leads to the exit, but the boy ends up getting into the wrong one and the dog has to jump in to save him. Together in the right boat, the two go down a ramp and are ejected from the back of the Sphinx. Even in safety, they still have to save Penny, who is already in the middle of her wedding. To stop the ceremony, the two enter the statue of Anubis and pretend to be the god of death to tell them that if the union is sealed, he will send his worst plagues throughout the Nile Delta. While the population trembles with fear at the threat, Sherman ends up dropping the cloth on top of the brazier and starts a fire in the statue's mouth. Because of the flames, Anubis' jaw breaks and the fake is revealed. Desperate, they start running away with Penny while the Egyptian soldiers go after them. Near the city walls, they use a counterweight system to climb up to the head of the statue of Horus, where the time machine is hidden. They manage to escape and Peabody starts driving back to the present day, but the machine starts to run out of power and they have to take a break in the middle of the Italian Renaissance. Needing help, Peabody decides to go to the house of Leonardo da Vinci, who is painting the Mona Lisa. After helping the painter finish his work, Peabody takes Da Vinci to where his machine is and together they develop a mechanism capable of transforming mechanical energy into electrical energy. Sherman is helping Peabody and Da Vinci when Penny invites him for a walk. Exploring Leonardo's house, the two find various gadgets in the attic, including the famous prototype of the flying machine. Thinking it's pretty cool, Penny climbs into what will one day become an airplane and asks Sherman how to take off. Not knowing what she is planning, the boy explains how the mechanism works and Penny activates the lever that throws them both into the air. Flying through the skies of Florence, Penny pilots the glider until she decides to hand over control to Sherman. As the boy refuses, Penny decides to release the prototype and let it free fall, forcing Sherman to overcome his fear and control the aircraft. With the wooden plane, the boy begins to maneuver around the main sights of Florence, all while Peabody and Da Vinci finish their invention. Suddenly, Leonardo sees his flying machine passing over them and the dog immediately realizes that Sherman is the one piloting it. Concerned, Peabody runs towards them and asks the boy to land, but when he tries to do so, Sherman ends up in the middle of the trees and crashes into a log, destroying the world's first prototype airplane. Despite this, the two are fine and Da Vinci is very happy with the success of his creation, but on the other hand, Peabody is extremely upset and asks them to leave as soon as possible, as he wants to talk when they get home. At his friend's request, Da Vinci turns on the mechanism and they finally get the energy to return. As they travel through time, Penny realizes how sad Sherman has become and encourages him to talk to Peabody, but when the boy tries to apologize, the dog just tells him that he has become a vandal. Outraged, Penny says that he's not a good father and that's why Mrs. Grunion wants to take Sherman away from him. As soon as he hears the statement, the boy asks if it's true and Peabody says that he won't let anyone separate them, but the discussion has to be left for later. At that moment, they come close to a black hole and begin to be sucked into the event horizon. To escape, Peabody puts the engines in reverse, but the energy isn't enough and he has to direct everything into the thrusters. While Peabody does his best to save them, Sherman asks why he hasn't told him anything about Mrs. Grunion and the dog replies that they should discuss it later, ordering him to sit down. Furious, Sherman says that he's not a dog and that he can't talk to a child like that, ending the argument. Peabody managed to transfer the energy to the thrusters and finally escape from the black hole, but the speed was such that, instead of returning to the present day, they went even further into the past, ending up in the middle of the Trojan War. As if that wasn't bad enough, Sherman fell out of the machine during the trip and now they have to look for him in the middle of the conflict. Inside the Trojan horse, Agamemnon is encouraging the main Greek heroes, and among them is Sherman. While the warriors are preparing for combat, Odysseus appears with a small toy horse and leaves the mysterious gift inside the wooden structure, without suspecting that Peabody and Penny are inside it. Wanting to get his son back, the dog asks to take Sherman with him, but Agamemnon refuses, saying that he has sworn an oath and must therefore take part in the battle. Worried about his son, Peabody tells him that he is about to take part in one of the worst wars in history and that this is not good, but Agamemnon continues to insist that he must fight. At that moment, the Trojans start carrying the horse into the city walls, which makes Peabody even more desperate. After his father tries to forbid him, the boy insists that he wants to take part and jumps off the horse with the Greek warriors, but he gets scared of the first Trojan that comes along and starts to run away. While trying to escape, Sherman ends up being cornered by the Trojan warrior and has to use his whistle to ask for Peabody's help, who saves him at the last second. Together, the two walk through the battlefield while the dog faces the Trojan soldiers. When they reach the horse's feet, they begin to climb the rope with Penny's help, but the city gate falls on the wooden structure and knocks them both down, causing the horse to run uncontrollably through the streets with the girl still inside. To save her, the boys steal a mount and ride through the streets of the city. On the other side, Peabody steals a harpoon which he uses to lasso the wooden horse's tail, attaching it to the concrete wall. In this way, they manage to break the structure and slide to the girl, but as they are leaving, Penny's dress snags on a nail and Sherman rushes to the horse's end to help. This displaces the center of mass and causes the entire structure to fall over the cliff. To save them, Peabody jumps onto one of the planks and throws them off the horse, but he don't have time to escape and end up falling onto the rocks of the Mediterranean Sea. Sad about losing his father, Sherman begins to cry until he has the idea of going back for a few seconds before they travel to Egypt. To do this, the boy goes back to the machine and tries to program the trip, but the computer displays an error message and says that it is not recommended to travel to a time in which he already existed, because if the two versions meet, they will cause a temporal collapse. Willing to do anything to save Peabody, Sherman agrees to take the risk and switches to manual control, forcing the machine to make the trip anyway. After a short trip through the wormhole, the two arrive in the living room and call Body in for a chat, telling him everything they've done to get there. After hearing about his death, the genius dog says that they couldn't go back to a time where they already existed, and Sherman replies that it's okay, because his other version is in ancient Egypt, but he couldn't be more wrong. Just then, the other Sherman shows up to ask for Mr. Peabody's help and is impressed to see a copy of himself. When they touch, the two versions of the boy begin to merge and Body becomes desperate, saying that they must find a way to fix things before the Petersons realize. Just then, Penny's parents show up and the Sherman of the present tries to hide from them, but just as he's about to leave their sight, Mrs. Grunion also arrives for dinner. Desperate, Body tries to hypnotize the woman, but instead ends up hitting the Sherman of the present, knocking him to the ground and making everyone realize that there are two versions of the boy. While the adults try to figure out what's going on, the other version of Peabody appears and reveals that he survived the fall of the Trojan horse. Happy to be reunited, Sherman hugs his father and asks how he managed to return, discovering that Body built a time machine out of bones and stones. Wanting to make things right, the dog says they should get back to the machine as soon as possible, and Grunion replies that they're not going anywhere, saying that she's seen enough to make Peabody lose custody of Sherman. Feeling guilty, Penny tries to explain that it was all her fault and apologizes, but Grunion doesn't listen and grabs the two boys, causing them to merge. To prevent this from happening, the two versions of Body approach and try to pull the boys out, but this makes the situation even worse and the four merge, causing Body and Sherman from the future to disappear, as well as causing an explosion that damages spacetime. With things seemingly calmer, Grunion grabs Sherman and starts dragging him out, but ends up hurting the boy, which activates Body's protective instinct, which attacks the woman. After receiving the bite, Grunion calls the police and Peabody decides to run with the children, taking them to the time machine, but when they start the journey to fix things, the vehicle starts to shake and they fall back into the present. After the error message, Peabody sees a wormhole in the sky and says that the collision between their copies has ruptured the fabric of spacetime, preventing them from traveling to the past. Suddenly, Da Vinci falls down the wormhole and several other personalities from history come after him. But that's not the biggest problem, as police helicopters soon start chasing them. In a car, Grunion and the Petersons start chasing the time machine until the Trojan horse falls right in front of them, forming a ramp where they almost run over Agamemnon. While searching for a hole that leads to the past, Body almost collides with a police helicopter and has to throw the machine to the ground to avoid casualties. Soon after the fall, Agamemnon and other personalities appear and try to help Peabody, but the police also arrive and ask Robespierre to drop his saber. When he refuses, the police end up firing a taser gun that fries the man's brains, causing all the time travelers to retreat. With no one else to get in the way, the police ask Body to get out of the machine and the dog tries to explain that he needs to fix everything, but Grunion tells him that he's just fooling around and orders animal control to take him away to be disposed of. To avoid this, Sherman tries to take the blame and take responsibility for everything, but Grunion says it's no use and that they can't change the law. At that moment, Penny calls George Washington and says that, as the first president of the United States, he can. Using their authority, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan granted presidential pardons to Body, but the problems were far from over. At that moment, the hole in the sky opens up even more and the Sphinx falls onto the streets of New York, hitting Mrs. Grunion. With humanity's greatest geniuses gathered together, they begin to think of a way to fix the temporal collapse, but come to no conclusion. Wondering how to solve the problem, Sherman comes up with the idea of traveling to the future and suggests that since they've never been there, it must not have been messed up yet. Once they arrive in the future, they must do the reverse process and return to the present, ending the instability of the wormhole. Thinking it was a great idea, Peabody tells Einstein and the others about the plan, who also think it's brilliant. With everyone's support, Buddy and Sherman enter the time machine and the boy begins to drive through the streets of the city. As the Titanic crashes into them, Sherman points the machine in the direction of the wormhole and accelerates to terminal velocity. With maximum acceleration, the boy presses the button that stops the fall and everything is sucked back into time. After the Sphinx's nose comes off, Grunion starts threatening Peabody until Agamemnon grabs her from behind, gets sucked into space-time and takes her to be his wife. After everyone is sucked back into their own time, the wormhole closes and the time machine appears intact in the sky, causing everyone to celebrate their success. With the world safe, everyone returns to everyday life and Sherman becomes Penny's best friend, overcoming everything they've been through. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.